We will have to wait a little bit. Yes. Well, Michael, thanks for having us to talk a bit about the theme of exploring discipleship. Could you tell a bit about how you're involved in the Fresh Expressions or the pioneering movement, and what's your role?
So I've been involved for the last 20 years, writing about it and researching it and advising pioneers and others. At the moment, I'm a consultant to the Church of England Diocese of Oxford, which has got a program to start, they hope, 750 new Christian communities over the next 10 years. And I'm also working with a project from the National Church of England to roll out what we call greenhouses to support pioneers, a bit like what you do, to support pioneers and their teams as they develop new Christian communities.
So these greenhouses will be, which is our leergemeenschap, the learning community. So you've been involved for 20 years, have been supporting the pioneers, and you also developed the Serving First journey, which is in Dutch the pionierreis. Can you tell us in short, how did you develop that?
So that came out of what we were observing. We just noticed that so many of these new communities, as they began to emerge, followed that cycle of listening, loving, building community, sharing the Christian faith, and then encouraging people to become a worshipping community where they are, connected to the wider church, and then to go and repeat the process. And we found that time and again, pioneers were intuitively following that cycle. And so we just, as it were, wrote it down, kept testing it on people. And I've been watching now for the last 10 or 12 years, testing in my mind, is that really what is happening? And I think it's only now, although I've written about it a number of years ago, I think it's only now that I feel very, very confident that this is what happens when we see Fresh Expressions at their best.
So you looked what's actually happened and turned it into a model that can help pioneers to think and reflect on their own journey and process.
Absolutely. It started with what the pioneers were doing, and then we began to put words around that.
Yes. So, and one of these topics is exploring discipleship. In Dutch, we have translated as geloven verkennen, so exploring faith. Why did you choose this title, Exploring Discipleship?
We didn't want to talk just about evangelism. We wanted to have the sense that people could be on a journey to discover what it might be like to follow Jesus. And it reflects the experience of many people. They don't just suddenly come into faith. It's often a gradual process. And it's a process by which you become a disciple of Jesus. You don't just acquire a whole lot of head knowledge. You just don't wake up one day and say, I'm a Christian, I can forget all about it. It's a process of following Jesus. So we wanted to get together those two ideas. One was the idea of exploration, and the other idea is the idea of following someone, of following Jesus Christ. And we wanted to put those two together. You're exploring whether or not you want to follow Jesus Christ, and if so, how you might follow Jesus Christ.
So you say it's a process that's exploring, and also it's about discovering what you think about Jesus and whether you want to live in his example. So it gives us some sort of focus also.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Yes, but you use the word evangelism, and well, there's a lot of trouble about that. People are have difficulty to talk about their faith. We don't want to be pushy. We don't want to tell people what to believe. How could we address that?
So I think, in our society, where people are very suspicious of power and suspicious of people who claim great absolute truths and so on, that one of the ways into that kind of culture is, first of all, to be very humble in the way that we talk about Jesus. Don't claim that we've got all the answers. Don't pretend that what we know is better than what they know. Let's just be humble, and that's the first thing. And then be honest. Talk about our own experiences of Jesus, the plus points, but also the difficulties and the disappointments sometimes we have, and the questions that are unanswered for us. So there's a question of humility. I'm just sharing what I found helpful. It may be good for you, it may not be good for you. You decide. I'm not going to try and persuade you. Being honest, this has worked for me, but it's not a bundle of fun. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it leaves me puzzled. And certainly I don't manage to live up to the great expectations that Jesus has for me. And then thirdly, I think just to be natural. When on Monday morning you go into the office or you're among your friends and people say, hey, what sort of weekend did you have? You might reply, well, actually, it was a great weekend because we had a fantastic party at the church I attend. So just bring your Christian life into the conversations. If someone has been struggling in your office or among your friends, and someone is struggling with a problem or an issue, a difficult next door neighbor, and later on they've shared that with you, and then later on they say, things really improved. If you've prayed for them, you can just drop in. Oh, I'm really glad to hear about that. You probably don't know this, but I actually prayed for you. So just make it part of your everyday conversation. And that's part of being honest. This is who you are. So just as someone might talk to you about the gym that they go to, or drop in that they went cycling with a bunch of friends, or they went running or jogging or whatever, you just drop into the conversation things that are relevant to you about your Christian faith. I went to church, this happened, I've been praying for you, whatever.
So you say you don't have to know all the answers, and you're not telling people what to believe. You are just sharing your life, and faith is a part of that. So it can be very humble and natural and out of your own experiences, including the difficulties and the questions that you have.
Yeah, this is absolutely right. And often I like to think of it as, this is part of a fuller life. Why is it that I want to be a Christian? Well, it's part of living a fuller life. If we start a fresh expression of church and we get to that stage where we want to begin to share what it might be like to follow Jesus and encourage people to explore that, it's as part of a fuller life. It's as part of a more abundant experience. Jesus said in John chapter 10, I've come that people may have life in all its fullness. Well, this is what we're talking about. Being a Christian is a part of living a richer life for us. It may not be for you, completely understand, but for me, it's a way of just living a slightly fuller life. So I think that's the tone and that's the context in which I would talk about it.
Yeah, so we are ourselves growing and discovering this fuller life, and we can share from this abundance, but also learn from others on their experience on spirituality, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's part of the humility and part of the honesty, seeing what they're discovering. And if they don't want to be a Christian, it may be that they spotted something in the church's life that has put them off. And we need to learn about that. And they may have things to teach us. So
Yes,
we can
exactly.
often learn a lot about our Christian faith from the people who aren't Christians, and we need to listen to them.
From the people who aren't Christians, we can learn a lot about them, about how church should be, or the questions
Yeah.
they ask, or the discoveries they made, etc.
Yeah, God is at work in their lives too. They may not recognize it. So the Holy Spirit may be preparing their lives to receive Jesus Christ more fully. But even if that's not happening, God can still be at work in some degree in their lives. And we need to watch for those signs of the Spirit being at work in the other person's life.
Okay, thank you. So this gives us some sort of context and an attitude how to address this. Do you have also an idea if you have a group, a pioneering spot, how could you make a step in this?
Well, one thing that you might do as a very first step is to introduce what I call conversations with a difference.
What's
So
that?
imagine that you've got a group, and maybe it's a group of teenagers, and they meet together and you have lots of fun together. Why not just halfway through, for 5 minutes, put out two tables, one with a popular television program, another with the name of a celebrity, and say, tell you what, for 10 minutes, why don't you just gather around those tables and talk about that? What's happened in that TV program this week? What's happened in that celebrity's life that's been in the news last few days? And then after a while, as they talk about it after 5 or 6 minutes or so, why don't you say, folks, just to make this a conversation with a difference, why don't you ask, if God existed, what would he think about what we've just been saying? Or if a great spiritual teacher was to join our conversation, what would that teacher say about the conversation we just had? And then let them talk about that. And you can do this in any way. You know, if you go cycling together, and maybe at the end you eat together to share your lives together, you might say, let's theme our conversations around any topic that anyone wants. Text me in advance and that'll be the topic. Is it what's been in the news? Is it a recent film we've watched? Is it a subject of mental health? Is it a radio program many people listen to? Is it our favorite music? Whatever the topic is it how to be a good parent? Whatever the topic is, the theme is, if it's of interest to the group, let's talk about it, but let's make it a conversation with a difference. Halfway through, let's say, if God existed, what would he think? Or if a great spiritual teacher joined our conversation, what would they contribute to what we're saying? Just to make it a slightly different conversation. And you can do that in anything that you're doing, any type of fresh expression. You could introduce that.
So you say you have a group, you have some sort of meal or activity which is just for fun, and you say, please, what's the topic? What's the theme you want to talk about? And you have this question: if God existed or a spiritual teacher would join us, what would he say? So people can make their own image about God and or about Jesus maybe as a spiritual teacher, and just figure out what they think. So you give it a spiritual dimension, but in all openness.
You give it a spiritual dimension in all openness. And what you're doing is, first of all, you're helping people to have confidence in talking about spiritual issues. A lot of people don't feel confident to talk about these questions. It's not what they're used to. And so you're introducing in a very gentle way a means for them to talk about spiritual issues in a way that's very natural and quite fun. You know, they can laugh and imagine things and so on. So it's not threatening. But what it does is to put spirituality on the agenda. And then you can watch as people talk and see whether they become more interested, to see where God is perhaps working in their lives through these conversations. And the Christians who are part of the group, they of course can talk about it from their perspective as well. So you can just be very honest about your own experiences. But what it does more than anything is to put spirituality on the agenda and get people talking about it. And you may well be surprised by what you hear. And you may find that people have got all sorts of spiritual insights that are enriching for you, but also enriching for each other, and that people really enjoy this. And they may be a lot nearer God than you realize, but you've given them permission to talk about this.
Yeah, so they also learn to talk about it, and that they may talk about it and can talk about it, although they are not a theologian or I don't know. So everyone can has to say something about the topic. That's
Yeah, they don't have to say anything, they can talk or not, but it gives everyone a chance to talk about something at a level of depth that they might not otherwise have done. And it's so natural and very easy with other people. They can make it a bit jokey and a bit of a laugh. And but it just opens the door. It opens the door.
But it still takes some leadership to address this issue. So you have to pose the question. So I guess it can still be a bit scary to start doing it.
Yeah, but you can make that a little bit less scary if you ask one or two people in the group before you do it. If we did this, do you think it would work? What do you think people would feel? So you don't just have to drop it in. Imagine there are three of you who are Christians who are leading this group. The three of you might talk about this and say, yeah, I think we could work. This could work. But you feel a little bit anxious. So then you might say, well, tell you what, let's ask a couple of people in the group who don't go to church and say, we've got this idea. We think it's a bit crazy, but do you think it would work? And do you think people would enjoy it? And then if they recoil and say no, then wow, you haven't made a mistake. But if they say, yeah, this could work, you could say, well, let's do it once or twice and see what happens. So the great thing is just to ask one or two other people.
Okay, so you ask, and then you know they are committed to it or open to it, and then it helps to take the step for yourself also.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have these conversations with the difference. Is there do you have an advice for a next step?
So the next step might be, imagine you've had these conversations for a while and people are enjoying them. You might say, hey folks, you know, I can see that it's quite fun to talk about spirituality and we're quite enjoying that. I'm thinking of starting a little group, perhaps at a separate time of the week, or perhaps for half an hour after we've met. You know, people who want to stay behind, just stay behind for half an hour. And what I'm thinking is we might look at some stories that Jesus told. Jesus is known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. Everyone virtually agrees about that. So let's look at some stories about him, some stories he told, and see what we think of them. And so, you know, maybe you've got a group of 8 or 9 or 10 people and 4 or 5 stay behind in this small little group with you after your meeting. And I would look at a Bible passage, one of the stories about Jesus, and I'd look at it over 4 weeks. And each time we meet over 4 weeks, I would ask one question. The first question would be, if this story happened today, what would it look like? If this story happened today, what would it look like? Then the next week, I'd recap, reread the story, and then I'd ask the second question. What's the story saying to me? What's it saying to you? What are you getting out of it? And then we talk about that. And then the third week, I'd ask the third question. Could the story make a difference to our lives? Could the story make a difference to my life? Could it make a difference to your life? And if so, how? And then I'd say to them, let's go away and do an experiment. Let's go away and see in the coming week if the story does make a difference to our lives. And then I'd come back and I'd go around the group and I'd ask the fourth question. Did the story make a difference to our life, to my life, to your life? Did it make a difference to my life? And if so, how? And all the way through that, I'd be saying it doesn't matter if it doesn't make a difference, if you forget all about it and so on, that doesn't matter. But there may be 1 or 2 people for whom it works, as it were, and we can learn from them. So 4 simple questions. If this story happened today, what would it look like? What's the story saying to you? What's it saying to me? Could the story make a difference to my life? If so, how? Did the story make a difference to my life? If so, how? And this means, you see, that it's really easy. The Christians just join in the discussion. You don't have to do any evangelism. The Bible does the evangelism. It all happened automatically through the discussion. And you as a Christian, all you have to do is to join in the discussion, answer the questions like everyone else.
So it can be a small group, like 4 people, 5 people. It has to be just half an hour per week, and you have these simple 4 questions, and you just pick each week, and the people go on this journey and they discover for themselves how does it relate to my life? Do I want to do this experiment? What works? So it's a very dynamic method that you are.
Absolutely.
telling us.
You could do it with one person. You could do it with 40 people and break them into small groups.
Oh, yes.
So you can do it with the whole group that you've got, or you can do it with one or two people. If you're putting it alongside what you're already doing, so it's a sort of half an hour after your main event, then I think doing it over 4 weeks, asking one question at a time, would make sense. If you wanted, you could ask the first 3 questions together in a study, and then you could go away. You know, you could meet for a whole evening where you're doing this. You could eat together. You could, ask all 3 questions, and then you could come back and touch base about how you all got back, how you got on, report back, and so on. So you can adapt it and do it in whatever way works for you. But I think small, bite-sized chunks is realistic. If people come, you might invite people for a meal to explore the stories of Jesus. Well, you eat together, you talk together, you exchange news. In Christian language, you have fellowship, you hang out together. And it might be that the Bible study is only half an hour in that whole evening. So you do it in a small, bite-sized chunk. And you might include a little bit of what I call headspace. You might have some silence at the end. You might light a candle, have some silence at the end, and say, let's, if we believe in God, let's pray to God as we understand him, her, or it. If we don't believe in God, that's fine. Let's have some positive thoughts for the person next door. So you might have 5 minutes of headspace. You might play some Christian music or some other kind of music. And so that might be part of the half hour as well. So you could begin to enrich it, and you could be praying that God works through the silence and the quietness of their hearts. So I'd be looking for simple things like that as a way of taking them on a journey.
So you're actually talking about how can we do some sort of praying or silent time, which is also suitable for
people who are not
kind of
Christian.
people.
And they're learning to pray. They may not use that language, but they may be learning to pray. And then, if someone said to me afterwards, said, that's amazing. While I was in that moment of quietness, I suddenly had a great sense of peace, and I'd been worried about something. Then I would say, well, as a Christian, I would say that that's probably the Holy Spirit of God working in your life. And if someone comes back next week and says, it's amazing, we prayed for my mother who's seriously ill and she unexpectedly got better, I would say, well, as a Christian, I would say that's God at work in your mother's life. And so you begin to put a Christian interpretation or Christian language around what they're experiencing and helping them to grow into, again, I talk about confidence, become confident and have a language in which to talk about their spiritual experiences. Many people have spiritual experiences, but they don't have a language to talk about it in. So what you're doing is giving them that language.
So, well, maybe when we get confident and we lose Christian language, it can also, of course, give a negative reaction, or people are saying things you really don't agree with, or there's, like a negative dynamic in the group. Do you have some sort of advice on that?
Yeah, I would say that if it's if someone comes up with a point of view that's controversial, it could lead to disagreement. Then and it might be an awkward moment. What I would do is I'd say to the group, I'll tell you what, let's go around the group and let's say, if God existed, what would he say about this question, about this issue, about this problem? And then I'd say, when we've gone around the group, let's go around a second time and only take part if you like, but where in people's comments did you see the love of God at work? Was it in the way they leant forward and listened to one another? Was it something that someone said? Was it the way they phrased it? Was it the attentiveness that they had to someone who spoke? Where in the group did you see, if God existed, the love of God at work? And I'd just do that and then say, great, now we've talked about this for a bit, let's move on and talk about something else. So that's a good way of managing conflict. Differences have been honestly faced. World War III hasn't broken out. We're all still friends. We can carry on. So I think I'd do that. And I wouldn't be worried about people coming up with wrong answers or anything like that. You know, we don't get to heaven by having right answers. It's much more important that we keep people just talking about the stories of Jesus.
So thank you, Michael. We have to wrap it up a bit now. So we have talked about an attitude of openness and just sharing your life and sharing your life, but also learning from others and their spiritual experiences. You've said you can start with conversations with the difference, just on a theme that's very popular in people's lives, and then add some spiritual dimension to it. And you could also start with a small group and take these 4 questions around the story of Jesus, and people can figure out for themselves what they pick out, what they want to try, and how they reflect on that. And you can also put some sort of prayer in different forms in it if you want. And then we will just see what happens. And people get also enthusiastic, I heard from you, if you just start trying and see what happens. So, do you want to add something?
No, just to say, I think that was a brilliant summary. You didn't need me at all. You said it much better than I said it. That's a fantastic summary. No, that's great. Well, we can leave it at that. There's more we could talk about, but I think that's enough for the moment.
Okay, well then, thank you very much for now.
Thank you. It's lovely being with you.